A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Conversation I'd like to invite you to join into, and it's one of those ones that, it probably relates mainly towards people who have a leadership role. And it might be a leadership role, whether it's in your local church, it might be in the small business that you lead, it could be in a community organisation. Any leaders, no doubt, some of the things we'll talk about over this next hour will be very important when you think about transitions. So we're turning our attention to something that Christians are notoriously not good at. In fact, it's something so important that it can make or break an organisation, and the effectiveness can be lost forever. I'm talking about how we transition leaders. Now, there have been a few transitions in recent times, and one today that we can highlight for some personal insight into how transitions happen. One of the best-known Bible teachers on Vision is Bernie Dymet, who's been CEO of Christianity Works for the past 21 years. He has just handed the baton on to a new CEO, whose name is Craig Coverdale. Christianity Works has an amazing history and reach. They're now reaching 160 countries around the world in 12 languages with gospel programs that speak life, love and salvation into the lives of listeners. So our privilege today to have both leaders, Bernie Dymet, the outgoing CEO, and Craig Coverdale, the new CEO of Christianity Works, in the studio. A special welcome along. First of all, Bernie Dymet, great to see you.
Neil, always good to be here.
And Craig, wonderful to welcome you too.
Thanks, great to be here.
Hey, Bernie, 21 years.
21 years?
It doesn't seem that long, does it? I'm sure. Hey, I know that you say the worst thing that a leader can do is hang on beyond your use-by date. Is this 21 years your use-by date?
I think in terms of leadership, yes. I mean, we see it in the Bible, right? King Saul hung on way beyond when God was done with him. And it is one of the worst things. I've seen it happen in large ministries, prominent ministries, where everybody could see it's time to go for the leader. But the leader themselves couldn't see it. I always remember when Shane Warne, the great leg spinner, retired at his press conference. Someone asked him, "Shane, why are you retiring now? You're still taking wickets, you're still at the top of the game." And he answered something like, "Well, I'd rather retire from this when you're asking me that question than when you're asking me, why don't you go?"
Yes, and of course the IPL might have made a bit of a difference too, because, beyond your career with the national team, there's still a global opportunity if you're a cricketer.
Yeah.
And so, that begs the question, doesn't it? Because it's not always age that says it's time to hang up the gloves. Sometimes there's a season. Age and season. Any reflection there from you, Bernie?
Look, for the last 2.5 years, I've been talking to our board saying, in my heart of hearts, I believe my season as the CEO is drawing to an end. Now, initially when that happened, and I just felt this sense that something was changing, I went to God and said, Lord, am I burnt out? Am I being lazy? Am I being slack? If that's the case, kick me in the backside and get me going again. But as time went on, I just knew in my heart that my time as leader was over. 21 years is a long time to be the CEO of anything. And, it's just time, man.
And you're the voice of Christianity Works.
Yep.
And some might say there are different gifts. There's an administrative gift as well, and the CEO has that administrative capacity, that ability, even a gifting there. It's not always quite so easy to have all of these gifts embodied in one. You certainly carry a lot of that, but you've got to be able to discern whose gift needs to be in the succession, don't you? Because the administration of an organisation like Christianity Works, well, it's a pretty complex one.
It is. I mean, we're in a lot of countries. We have staff from Colorado Springs to Durban to Hyderabad. There are people all over the world as a part of the ministry of Christianity Works. And it's no small task in leading that group of people, because there is a spiritual leadership component and an administrative leadership component, and trying to do that honestly with how large the ministry has grown, at the same time producing all the radio and television programs that I produce. It's just not possible for one person. It just isn't.
And you're not actually hanging up the gloves. you're in the fight, you're in the battle still, because you're going to be continuing to produce amazing radio and TV programs, and you're expecting that to continue on. Maybe you'll drop dead in the role.
Well, maybe the Lord will call me home, which is perhaps a nicer way of saying it, Neil. Eh?
Yes.
Look, I wouldn't mind going while I'm in harness at all, but my theology of retirement is very straightforward. Retirement's not in the Bible, so it must be a sin, right? I say that laughingly, but no, I have no intentions of retiring. I love teaching the Bible in the media. I love the writing and the producing and reaching people with the good news of Jesus Christ. Lord willing, if it's God's will, I'd love to do that until he returns. So that's my desire, but it's up to God, right?
Craig Coverdale, you're the new man in charge.
That's right.
The new man in charge, stepping into leadership of a ministry like this. No small thing, is it?
No, that's right. But, thankfully, it's not my first blush with Christianity Works. So I first met Bernie back in Sydney in 2007. And it's been a wonderful association and eventually onto the board and chairmanship of the board. So, I've had some good experience in management already of Christianity Works and the people within the organisation. But let me tell you, I'm seeing it in high definition close up right now.
Yeah, well, your history, back to 2007 when you joined Christianity Works, and you didn't join into a leadership role. As I understand it, you were volunteering stuffing envelopes at the time because back in 2007, the marketing was probably a little bit different to what it is today, and you were there hands-on.
Well, it was a lot smaller organisation back then, and this is part of the story of Bernie Dymet, taking it from an empty vessel, back in 2004 into what it is today, and the geographic coverage and the language coverage of spreading the gospel. But yeah, those early days, I was a donor to the organisation, and I had a business that during the GFC I found out was rather susceptible. And I got to a point where I said, well, I can't actually provide financially at the moment. How about I help you stuff some envelopes? And that's exactly what I did.
And what we might even be reflecting on how God uses economic circumstances to maneuver you into a place where you're going to be used in his purposes. Do you often reflect on that?
I do.
Because you had the business acumen. You were a mortgage broker back in those early years. You recognised the GFC was having an effect. You had some time on your hands, stuffing envelopes down at Christianity Works, and I wonder whether even in those early days you saw even the possibility that one day you might move into a position where you're actually responsible for the organisation.
The answer is not initially, but over time that became evident that there was something more than money that I could provide. And whether that's stuffing envelopes or providing contacts or some business acumen. But I always like to reflect on a story that occurred while I was actually stuffing on those envelopes. I was literally putting pieces of paper into envelopes. Yep. And while we were doing that, I got a call from the finance director of one of Australia's largest listed property companies. And they said, I think we might need a bit of a hand. The banks are shutting up shop on us. And as a result of that phone call, while I was stuffing envelopes, that led to over $700 million of commercial property assets being financed. And that, for me, that was a clear sign, hey, something's going on here.
Yes. And, the blessing of God that follows the volunteerism of believers. And I know that there'd be a lot of testimonies if we opened the phone lines on that today.
Yeah.
But Bernie, you've seen this time and again, people that have come to work with you in the ministry. God hasn't let go of their own aspirations and their own financial well-being.
No, it's been amazing how, and not just volunteers, but also people who have given so generously. Like Vision Christian Radio, we are funded by supporters, people who believe in what we're doing. And time again, I have seen how God has honoured, not necessarily with financial blessing, but blessed people in ways that they didn't expect, because they showed up and they did what they could do. They laid their gifts, their abilities, their time on the altar for the Lord to take up.
Well, 21 years, and no doubt there's been a conversation going on with Craig for some time now, because if this time was coming, if this season was, you were moving to let go of the administrative leadership, no doubt there's a conversation. How long are we talking here? And for listeners who are thinking, we need to have some transition succession planning in the organisation that I'm a part of. What did you do, Bernie?
Well, look, it was really difficult because obviously it's always better to promote from within, right? Because the person is known, they know the organisation. But we're a small outfit, 13 staff in 5 or 6 countries, and there was really no one to promote from within. So initially, we went out to our network to say, look, if you know anyone, put them forward. Nothing happened. We had a board meeting, and I said to the board, look, either we have to cast the net wider, like christianjobs.com.au, or we have to cast the net over the other side. But I don't know what the other side looks like. And our chairman, Steve Marshall, said, what about Craig Coverdale? And we all just sat there and went, what a great idea. It was a real God. So poor old Craig was sitting at home, bless his heart, minding his own business up there in Lismore, and he got a phone call from me, and Craig, God loves you, and Bernie has a plan for your life. Right. So we began the discussion. We had a competitive process, and it was obvious that Craig was the right person to take over the role.
Isn't it amazing when the penny drops? There's a recognition that as you're sitting around, with your board or your management team and you're saying, who have we got that could step into this role? And a name comes to mind, a reliance on God to bring to the fore that name that you want to put forward and then open the discussion with. How confident can you be in those moments that you're hearing from God?
That's a really good question. We as a board, the board, which I'm no longer part of anymore because I'm not the CEO, but as a board have always operated to tease out the difficult issues. Iron sharpens iron. We have the tough discussions. And there was a confluence both of common sense in looking at Craig, whom we know, and we know the skills, common sense, but also spiritual guidance from God that we all sensed that this was the right decision.
And this idea that a lot of people have is we have to bring a replacement in from outside the organisation. I heard you say better to promote from within. Is this all about culture? There's something of a culture that you can't afford to lose, so there's a certain sense in which people within the organisation actually are hugely valuable.
Absolutely. There's a great business book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, and he makes the point that the really successful organisations inevitably promote their leaders from within, which we never thought would be possible because we were so small. And yet, in a sense, we really have done that because Craig was with us for 10 years as our chairman. So maybe technically, Craig, we've demoted you from chairman to CEO. Maybe we've demoted from within, but he is a known quantity. There was another person who was shortlisted and who we interviewed who would have been a sensational CEO, a really good CEO, but we just felt as a board that this was the right decision.
Visions 2020 with Neil Johnson. A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events.
Let me throw these gentlemen into the deep end here, because sometimes what happens when there is a transition of leaders, there's a issue around power. Now, I've got to ask you this, the challenge of letting go of power. How do you think you're going to handle that, Bernie?
This is not my first rodeo. When my partners and I sold our IT consulting firm to a public company in 2001, we had to let go. We'd sold the company. And it was like giving your baby away. There was a certain grief around, we've built this thing for the last 17 or 18 years, and now I'm handing it over to someone else. And there was a sense of mourning. Okay, we got a payout, and that was great, but there was a sense of loss and mourning. So when this change of season was coming, that's something I was very much expecting. To me, the only appropriate response to the Jesus who died for me on the cross is unconditional surrender. That I hold nothing back from him. And that translates in the transition of leadership. As a leader, I now lay it down. It is unconditional surrender. Craig's only been on the case for 2.5 weeks. He hasn't had a chance to make a decision yet that I don't agree with, but he is one day going to make a decision that I don't agree with. That's an absolute given. And the only response is unconditional surrender.
And the risk is that the outgoing CEO, who is still part of the organisation, becomes like that haunting ghost, sniping and undermining from the sidelines. But this is something, and I'm going to get your impression here, Craig. You were aware that these things can happen, and you've got some things that you've decided you've talked about and put in place before the opportunity for things to go wrong.
Well, that's right. This was one of the issues that in taking up the role, I was high on the agenda to discuss, because the identity of Christianity Works, of the ministry here in Australia and overseas, is largely tied to Bernie Dymet. And Bernie is such a good communicator, a clear communicator, that he casts a very long shadow over the ministry.
I like to think of it as a light, mind you. I like to think of it, but I'll go with the shadow metaphor.
Okay.
and so this was something that I discussed with the board and with Bernie, and certain assurances were made in that regard. And I'm so happy to report that during the handover period, and since I've taken over the reins officially, that it's been a very good experience where you soon realise that Bernie has passed over the reins, and there's a lot to do. And Bernie is there to advise, but at the end of the day, that's your task list, not his. it's with you, but it is a live issue, and I've seen it in business over the decades, where people have moved on to another season and transitioned poorly by hanging on and wanting to have influence over decisions that realistically belong to somebody else.
And you'll be able to keep this podcast on hand to remind Bernie, because he's made that commitment, the unconditional handing over of the power. But this is an interesting thing here, because for you to say, Bernie, that I can unconditionally say I'm passing on the baton, the power is going to be now for decision-making in the hands of my successor. But you can't do that unless you have a culture in your organisation that has a clear purpose and that has a clear mission. Because if, as a leader, your next successor has that same purpose and that same mission, you can be much more comfortable. And this should be a strength of Christian organisations.
It should be a strength of Christian organisations, but it often isn't. Often leadership handover is quite acrimonious. I was involved with a large, prominent ministry in the USA where the president and CEO wouldn't hand over and wouldn't go, and was ultimately fired by the board, and then went around and undermined all of the supporters of the ministry. And that happened to me 25 years ago. I saw that happen firsthand. And from then on, I decided that I want to finish well. This is about the glory of God. It is not about Bernie Dymet. It is not about what I think. This is about lives being saved and transformed around the world. And I am adamant to finish well.
And there's something that we talk about, another strength of Christian organisations, and whether this is a business that you operate or your local church or a Christian ministry, or might even be a sub-ministry within your church, the idea of a calling. Now, if I'm asking you, Bernie Dymet, you'll be able to describe a calling. You've got a story that goes along with that. But if I come over to Craig and say, Craig, calling in here, confidence before God, that this is that where he's got you, how do you reflect on calling?
Oh, well, I think it's, for me, it's been a 40-year journey. And I can always recall when I was at university back in the late 80s, I came home one day and told my father, look, I think I'm going to ditch the economics and study theology. Well, there were raised fists within about 15 seconds. And that was literally 40 years ago, and I didn't take up the calling and take up a theological path back then. And, you know, I'm a firm believer of seasons and opportunities, and things happen for a reason. And I was available to take up this role. It was a season in my life where I could say, yes, I feel the calling, and I'm going to take this forward. And so in that respect, it's been a real blessing. I would say, back on your previous point, the role of the board in these transitions is so important, because if there's clear direction at the board, knowing what the ministry is for, who's in the ministry, and the direction that the ministry is taking, then it gives a clear direction to the CEO about what you must do, because the CEO reports to the board.
Yes, and that submission is going to be very important, because the board typically sets that mission, sets that purpose, and the CEO being answerable to the board means that to remain mission true, you've got to submit to the board. Otherwise, you risk this thing called mission drift, and the possibility of drifting away from the intentions and the good integrity of an organisation, Bernie.
Absolutely. And our passion is to reach millions of people one by one with the good news of Jesus Christ by teaching the Bible in the media around the globe. That is who Christianity Works is. And that's what the board has directed, and that's what the CEO, I as the outgoing CEO, Craig as the new CEO, are committed to continue to do. And other thing, importantly, I joked about it before, but I'm not the founder of the ministry. We were planted by Back to the Bible in 1957. But when I became involved in 2004, it was almost dead, and we kind of, gave it a heart starter and restarted it. So practically speaking, I am the founder of the renewed ministry. I have deliberately said I will not be on the board of the ministry. I am subject to the CEO, and the CEO is subject to the board. My ex-military understanding of accountability is very strong in me. And so we do need to continue to do what the ministry was created to do.
Let me start this part of our conversation, Bernie, coming back to leading organisations, because some listeners are saying, well, I don't lead a Christian organisation, I'm leading a business organisation. Is there a difference between business organisations that might not necessarily be Christian in the way that they are exposed to the community, and that Christian organisation that really has a spiritual heart to it? What's the difference, do you think?
Look, the answer is yes and no. They're the same, but they're different. They're the same to the extent that whether you're a Vision Christian Radio, or whether you're a Christianity Works, or you're a local church with 30 congregants on the corner just down the road, there is a business dimension to running a Christian ministry. Without finances, there is no ministry. Without stewardship, you're not honouring God. Without administration, you don't get stuff done. People, I guess, listen to you, Neil, on radio, and they think, oh, well, it's Neil in the studio, right, with a couple of guys, and they're talking, and that's it. I have to tell you, folks, that when you go upstairs here at Vision Christian Radio, there are people beetling away on all sorts of different stuff, because there is much more to doing ministry than just doing the ministry that Neil's doing now. So there is a business dimension, whether you like it or not. But there is something that is vitally different. I've been a leader since I graduated from Duntroon in 1980. Where I was a young officer in the Army. I've run my own IT organisation, and that's hard. Leadership is always hard. But in ministry, listen to this, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. There is a spiritual dimension to this where our enemy, the devil, does not want, Neil, you sharing the gospel with people around Australia, with Christianity Works sharing the gospel around Australia and beyond. And we run into spiritual opposition in all sorts of different ways. So for a Christian leader, personal holiness and a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is the single most important thing. It's all about Jesus. It's all about our relationship with him. Nothing we do in ministry is of any worth unless it comes from the Spirit of God.
Sometimes we want to differentiate, don't we, between the Christian organisation and the business organisation.
Yep.
And I think what I've just heard as you're saying that there is while we have a focus on that spiritual integrity dimension for the Christian leader of the Christian organisation, but something says to me, Bernie, it's no less important for the business organisation, but sometimes we've got to have a little bit of change of heart. There's got to be a new birth of thinking about how that works. But it's just as important, isn't it, for the person who's leading any organisation?
Look, it's just as important to have a relationship with Jesus and to live a life of obedience and holiness. But my experience of running a secular organisation, my IT consulting firm, which was, again, 3 partners, we had 50 consultants right around the world. It was hard. It was hard. Christian ministry is much harder because there is active spiritual opposition to the work that we do. The enemy comes against you. The enemy tries to drive wedges into your organisation. The enemy tempts you to be dishonest. And I think that spiritual dimension makes Christian ministry the hardest form of leadership I've ever done.
And for people who are in business, and let me come back to Craig on this, people who are in business, recognising that even though they're generating finances, so if you're in business, you want to make a profit, you're making profit with a purpose, and that purpose is a godly purpose too if you have a Christian heart to your leadership. And there's a partnership that happens, and this is one of the things, I guess, in your transition here, Craig, is shoring up those relationships with those who've been supporters for decades, because now with a new leader, people have got to get used to another name.
Well, that's exactly right. And in the transition, we've been working together to make sure that, in our written communications, our verbal communications, even down to some of the images that we've taken together, to make sure that, our donors, our supporters, know that Bernie isn't really going anywhere. He is still there, and he's just taken on a new role. And so that continuity of message and that continuity of image is very important.
In some sense, you've got to make the best of Bernie now, haven't you? Because
there's a challenge.
His voice is his voice. Not only that, but he's written many books, and there are a lot of writings. There are a lot of programs, whether they be broadcast programs on radio or whether on TV. All of those, no doubt, there's packages and amazing teaching series. So with Bernie still on board, you've got to be able to maximise the gift that he continues to bring for the organisation.
Absolutely, and so what we are doing is we have a vast library of Bernie in audio and visual and written scripts, and we'll be doing a couple of things with those. But one of them is ensuring that we can make best use of that archive, as well as the new Bible teachings that Bernie will be putting together. And so we'll be looking at new formats that we can broadcast in, and whether that's different time slots or different content preparations that we'll make. The other thing that we'll be doing is broadening the footprint of where Bernie's voice is broadcast around the world. And that's, that takes feet on the ground and it takes resources, and we're willing to do that. And
the beautiful thing about the Christian ministry that you have with Christianity Works is that those series that you've worked on over decades, Bernie, they don't date, because this is the timeless Word of God expounded for people to be able to apply in their situation. Hey, let's take a call from a listener. Our talkback line open on 1800 316 316. Let's hear from Kevin in Armidale in New South Wales. Hey, Kevin, welcome.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for having me on.
Kevin, what are your thoughts? Have you seen some good things or some bad things in some transitions?
Well, I've actually seen some good things, and firstly, I'd like to say congratulations to Bernie on his new chapter That's the way I look at it, of life. I was in Boys Brigade, which is a Christian organisation, and I was the captain of the company. I started when I was 10. I retired when I was 46. But I felt that I'd lost my joy. And I said to the church, can you find another person to take over as captain? And they didn't do anything for the first 12 months, so I put a name forward and they accepted 12 months later. But for me personally, I felt I had to step right out because I would have taken over. So I knew that if I was to stay on board, I would be trouble.
Yeah, and this is what you hold on to after you've been there in that role for decades. Bernie, what are your thoughts here for Kevin?
Look, Kevin, I completely understand. You've got to do what God has called you to do. And if you don't feel... I mean, I remember leaving a church once because I didn't agree with what was happening in leadership. And I didn't feel called to step in, and I wasn't going to sit in the pews and grumble, right? And so if that's the circumstance you find yourself in, it's absolutely the right thing to do to step back completely. I don't feel that that's what God's called me to do, and so I will continue to preach the gospel, God willing.
And Kevin, have you found that there is a new chapter for you, having stepped aside from that Boys Brigade role? Is there something else you've moved into?
Yeah, well, I started going along to Emmaus, which is an organisation run by Open Doors in USA, and involved with that. It's mainly music. For 20 years after I retired from Boys Brigade. So God opened up another door. And at the moment, there's no door opening, but I'm still in the music ministry in our church. So that's where my chapter is at the moment.
It's a chapter and it's a season. And you know what? If you've got energy, vitality and gifts, something that can be offered to God for use in any organisational capacity, God will open a door there for you. But Kevin, thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316. Let's reflect just for a moment. Joshua was God's chosen successor to Moses. There's some biblical foundations here that we could look to. I don't know whether you've been reflecting on some of those at all, Bernie, but, you know, God has his successor chosen and prepared, and he's got, you know, a new future. He's got a promised land in some sense, if you're talking about Joshua and Moses. How do you sort of reflect on perhaps even any biblical ideas and understandings about succession planning?
Joshua chapter 1 verse 9, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous, do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go, is a verse that I have carried around in my heart for the whole of the 21 years. And I often reflect, had Moses been allowed to lead Israel into the promised land, I have no doubt Israel would have ended up worshipping Moses.
Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt whatsoever. But God in his wisdom took Moses away from the leadership. I mean, Moses only had one sense of humour failure. You know, he only got upset that one time, and God said, that's it, you're not going to go into the promised land. God was very wise to bring a new leader to the table who must have been absolutely petrified. And I know there have been a few days here over the last 6 weeks or so where Craig and I have been together, and he's shaken his head and looked at all the stuff that has to be done and thought, oh my goodness. But I think there is huge wisdom in God transitioning leaders.
You know what, you raise such an important point, because, yes, if Moses had led the children of Israel into the promised land, and if he had been then exalted to, you know, the godlike figure, the idea of a personality cult.
Yes.
Now, especially for Christian ministries here, there's a level of humility, and I think people have heard that humility in your presentation here today, Bernie. You're handing this over unconditionally. There's a certain humility there. But the idea of a personality cult, if you are thinking that you are the only way that your organisation can succeed, you're probably missing the point, because God has got a successor in plan, and you've got to be able to look for that. But anyway, anything further to add to that, Bernie?
No, I think it's really important for a leader not to believe your own propaganda, right? I mean, just stay small. And when I was called to preach the gospel, I remember right at the beginning when I just became a Christian and I felt the call to go and preach the gospel, I kept on saying to God, Lord, look, I've got an ego the size of a small planet, right? So if you want me to preach the gospel, they're going to have to see you and not me. And that was my constant prayer, and God, out of his sense of humour, stuck me in radio, right? Where they didn't get to see me, they got pointed to God. So I think for any leader who is listening today, take this one thing away. Don't believe your own propaganda.
A very, very significant word of wisdom there. Let me come to Craig, because, here you are, Joshua. Maybe there's a Jordan or two to cross. Maybe there's some walls in Jericho that you're going to be needing to lead the march around 7 times to see the hand of God at work. Can you prepare yourself in advance? I mean, you've already been on this journey with Bernie. You've already been a servant in the organisation. Preparation of your own heart for those times when it's going to take a significant step of faith to see the hand of God take the organisation to new levels.
Do you know, I think that a good leader is a good servant first. And, there's lots of examples in the Bible and even in business where the true leaders who take their organisations forward do that by bringing people within the organisation along with them, and they're happy to pull in the same direction and achieve great results. The thing about Christianity Works is that it's not Bernie Dymet Ministries. Mm-hmm. And so it had a history before Bernie, it'll have a history after Bernie, it'll have a history after myself. And so, I see myself as a servant of the ministry, but I just see myself as one pebble in the stream, and the ministry will go on, and I believe that God will provide more leaders in the future and resources for the expansion of his word.
Well, let's talk about some hopes, some aspirations. You might even already have a plan for the next 12 months, 5 years, 10 years. You might have been researching all of these things and waiting on God for knowing what is around the corner. But hopes for the ministry. Bernie, thoughts from you as to where you might hope Christianity Works moves from this point?
Well, I'm expecting God to quadruple the footprint of the ministry through Craig, right? I mean...
Thank you.
No, seriously. Look, it's all about reaching people with the good news of Jesus. So God, we've never been short of opportunities. The only thing that ever holds us back from following those opportunities is resourcing, right? Finances and resourcing. And I'm just believing that Craig and he's a very different style of leader to me, just as Joshua was different to Moses, just as Tim Cook was different to Steve Jobs when he took over Apple Computer. It's just as Phil Edwards was different to Ian Warby when he took over running Christian Media, Vision Christian Radio. He's a different style of leader, and I'm just believing that God is going to breathe a new life and grow the reach and impact of the ministry and bring new Bible teachers alongside that we can build into the ministry to reach more and more people for the glory of God.
I wonder, only a few more minutes remaining for our conversation, the really practical things when you've got succession planning, a transition to a new leader. There must be some practical things even in a handover process. If I'm coming to you, Craig, what sort of things are essential if you're looking to take over from someone like Bernie who's been at the helm for 21 years? What sort of process is necessary here in the practical sense?
Well, the very practical first issues are, changing the directorships and asset details and titles. You've also got to have a look at the regulatory environment that you operate within, because it's a not-for-profit. Yep. So there are responsibilities that need to be attended to. But once that's done, then it's for myself, it's really getting to know the people around you more intimately, and that's your staff, because nothing happens without the people around you. And I pencil in every day some time just to make phone calls, pull alongside people, say how it's going, nothing to do with work, but understand who you're working with, because each of us have individual gifts. Mine has largely been, finance and Bernie said to me last week that in some of my writing and communications, I need to knock the frost off them, so that make them a bit warmer.
Yep. Yep.
And that's great advice. But I always go back to the actual mission that we're about, which is producing digital content and distributing that content throughout the world for the glory of God. That's it.
In this practical sense, the warmth, knocking the frost off, because you want to be relatable. And you mentioned your staff, but there'll be an awful lot of supporters. And let me assume that there'll be some listeners today who are saying, well, I think I'm a supporter. They've got me on their list. I get a mailing every now and then. And, Bernie's new book that's been offered for free or whatever it might be. You've got a lot of people and you need a certain level of warmth to be able to, you've got to win some new friends. Bernie's made a lot of friends.
Yeah, that's right.
Now that there's a new kid on the block, you've got to actually forge your own friendships here.
Well, that's right. You can only be yourself, and what you bring to the table is part of the history that you've experienced over many years before this time. So, in how you're going to take the ministry forward. You've really got to you've really got to make sure that you've got a clear idea. You refer back to the board. You bring people along with you, and take it from there.
And the programs themselves into 160 countries, but you've got staff who are not just in the office with you. You've got staff internationally too.
Yeah, that's correct. And so we'll be in South Africa next week visiting, and for me, meeting these wonderful staff. And we'll be in the UK a couple of weeks after that. And, it's really important that there is continuity between Bernie and myself and in the messaging. And from there, it's we want to remain the same flavour, albeit, it's with the next person coming along.
Bernie Dymet, 21 years at the helm, knowing when your use-by date is up. If we're just drawing a few loose ends together here, and I know there might be perhaps a word of wisdom for people who are thinking, I'm thinking my time might be up in the organisation that I'm a part of, whether they're leading a business or whether it's a ministry role, it's in their local church or even a department within their local church. Just that courage that it takes to make the decision. Once you make the decision, then you've got to follow through. But is it hard making the decision in the first place?
Depends if you've self-actualised through your position. If you're able to detach yourself from your position and your role and your title, then it's easy to make the transition. I would counsel anyone who thinks maybe their time is coming to an end to really pray about it, because the Holy Spirit will let you know and give you a great peace if it is that time.
And for the person who might have the aspiration to one day lead the organisation that they're a part of, is there a preparation that happens in that person too?
Absolutely. Serve, serve, serve. Humble yourself. No task is below you. If a task is below you, then leadership is beyond you.
And in no doubt that it was Jesus himself who turned leadership on its head when he said, the greatest among you will be the servant of all. To you both, Bernie Dymet, the outgoing CEO, and Craig Coverdale, the new CEO of Christianity Works. And as we said a little earlier, it's not that you'll not hear Bernie's voice. He's going to be into production of all sorts of wonderful quality programming that's going to continue to highlight the Word of God and the wisdom that really cuts through and touches where the rubber hits the road in your life. Keep listening out for a different perspective. You can hear that evenings on Vision, and Christianity Works on Sundays around the middle of the day. Check your program guide for when that's on, and you can enjoy the continuing programming. But there's a change of CEO. Bernie Dymet, the outgoing CEO, and what a privilege it is to be able to introduce Craig Coverdale, the new CEO of Christianity Works today. To you, Bernie, thank you so much for joining us.
Bless you, mate.
And to you, Craig, wonderful to meet you, and looking forward to great things for the future.
Thank you, Neil.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.